The small suburban neighborhood had always been known for its manicured lawns, neat flower beds, and the unspoken rule that everyone kept to themselves. But behind those perfect picket fences, not everything was as peaceful as it appeared. For Marcus, a hard-working father of two who had moved into the neighborhood just 3 years ago, this so-called paradise was slowly turning into a nightmare. It started subtly, as most neighborhood conflicts often do. Marcus noticed tire marks cutting across the edge of his freshly mowed lawn. At first, he brushed it off as maybe a delivery truck that had gotten too close to the curb. He patched up the tracks, replanted some grass, and thought nothing more of it. But then, the marks appeared again, and this time, they were deeper, longer, running diagonally across the yard as though someone had intentionally cut through instead of using the street. Frustrated, Marcus began to pay closer attention. The culprit revealed herself one Saturday morning while Marcus was sipping coffee on his porch. A shiny white SUV came barreling around the corner far too fast for a residential street, the driver a middle-aged woman with oversized sunglasses and a smug expression. Instead of slowing down to make the turn properly, she drove straight across Marcus's yard, her tires pressing into the soft soil, scattering clumps of earth and grass. Marcus shot up from his chair, waving his arms, but she didn't so much as glance in his direction. She just kept going, cutting through his property as if it were nothing more than a public shortcut. Marcus couldn't believe it. He had worked hard to buy this house, had spent weekends tending the yard, seeding the grass, and planting shrubs along the edges. Now, a complete stranger was treating it like her personal racetrack. The neighbors later filled him in. The woman's name was Karen, and she had been a problem long before Marcus moved in. She was on the HOA board, wielding her minor position of power like a weapon. She was the type of person who measured other people's lawns with a ruler, handed out warnings if a trash can was left visible for 5 minutes too long, and bragged about keeping the neighborhood up to standards. Yet she herself constantly bent or broke rules whenever it suited her. Marcus decided to confront her. The next time he saw her SUV roll down the street, he stood firmly in his yard and motioned for her to stop. To his surprise, she actually rolled down her window. "Excuse me," Marcus began, keeping his voice calm though his chest was tight with anger. "You've been driving across my lawn. This is private property, and I'd appreciate it if you stopped." Karen stared at him for a long moment, then smirked. "Maybe if you kept your yard bigger, it wouldn't be in the way. That corner's tight, and my car's too nice to risk scratching on the curb. Besides, it's just grass. It'll grow back." Marcus felt his jaw clench. "That's not the point. It's my property. You don't get to destroy it because you're too lazy to make a proper turn." Karen's tone grew sharper, dripping with disdain. "Listen, don't make this a big deal. I'm on the HOA board. If I want, I can file complaints about the condition of your property. Those shrubs by your driveway, they're technically not HOA compliant. You might want to watch yourself before you start accusing people of things." With that, she revved her engine and sped off, once again clipping the edge of his grass as she went. That night, Marcus sat at his dining table, stewing over her arrogance. He thought about calling the HOA, but quickly realized it was pointless. Karen was on the board, and many of the other members were her friends. Complaining would just make him a target for more harassment. He even considered filing a police report, but what could he say? That his neighbor drove across his lawn. They'd laugh it off as a civil dispute. The situation escalated over the next few weeks. Marcus tried small deterrents at first. He placed some decorative solar lights along the edge of his lawn. Within 2 days, 3 of them had been smashed by Karen's tires. He set up a row of potted plants, hoping they'd serve as a barrier. Karen simply knocked them over, leaving cracked pots and spilled soil scattered across the grass. Each time, Marcus felt his blood boil, but Karen never showed a shred of remorse. In fact, she seemed to enjoy it, as if deliberately proving that she was untouchable. One afternoon, as Marcus was unloading groceries from his car, she slowed her SUV beside him and leaned out her window. "Careful there," she said mockingly. "Wouldn't want your kids playing too close to the street. Drivers can't always control where their cars go, you know." Then she laughed and drove off. That was the final straw. Marcus was a patient man by nature. He worked long hours as an electrician, priding himself on his ability to solve problems with logic rather than anger. But this wasn't just a problem, it was a deliberate violation, an insult, a challenge. He knew he couldn't count on the law or the authorities to protect his property. If Karen was going to keep treating his yard like a doormat, he'd have to find another way to put an end to it. The idea came to him late one night as he sat staring out at the damaged lawn. The grass was torn up in ruts, patches of mud glistening under the moonlight. His kids had been upset earlier when their soccer ball disappeared into one of the muddy grooves. That image stuck in his mind, fueling his determination. He remembered something his grandfather once said: "Sometimes, you can't stop people from crossing the line. But you can make sure they regret it if they do." Marcus began to plan. He visited a hardware store the next morning and picked up what he needed: metal spikes, sturdy and sharp. They were the kind often used for anchoring landscaping ties or securing fencing, long enough to sink deep into the soil yet still leave their pointed tops just beneath the surface. He bought several packs, along with gloves and a heavy rubber mallet. Over the next few evenings, once the neighborhood had gone quiet and Karen's SUV was nowhere in sight, Marcus went to work. He carefully measured out the section of his lawn where she usually cut across. Then, one by one, he hammered the spikes into the ground, spacing them in a neat line just below the grass. From above, the lawn looked untouched, perfectly normal. But beneath the surface, it had become a minefield for careless tires. Marcus felt a grim satisfaction as he finished the last row. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about defending his home from someone who had made it clear she didn't respect boundaries. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone, only to ensure that if Karen insisted on trespassing again, her precious SUV would pay the price. For the first time in weeks, Marcus slept peacefully. He didn't know when Karen would strike again, but he was ready. The grass hid his secret well, and soon enough, Karen was about to learn that some lines weren't meant to be crossed. The following morning dawned calm and golden, with the sound of sprinklers ticking rhythmically across the neighborhood. Marcus woke up feeling oddly refreshed, though beneath that calm surface, his anticipation simmered. Every time he glanced out the window, he wondered if today would be the day. Karen had been brazen for weeks, her SUV carving across his property without a shred of guilt. Now, the trap was set, invisible under the lush green blades of grass. For 2 days, nothing happened. Marcus noticed Karen's SUV pass down the street a few times, but she didn't cut across his lawn. It made him wonder if she somehow suspected something. Maybe she'd noticed him working in the yard at odd hours. Maybe one of the nosy neighbors had tipped her off. But then, on the third afternoon, it happened. Marcus was in his garage fixing one of his kids' bikes when he heard the sound. Tires crunching over soft earth, the familiar growl of Karen's SUV taking the corner too sharply. His heart leapt into his throat as he dropped the wrench and rushed outside, just in time to see the SUV's front wheels sink into the grass. For a split second, everything seemed normal. Then came the sound. A sharp, metallic scrape followed by a violent pop. The SUV lurched forward, wobbling unnaturally. Karen slammed the brakes, but the damage was already done. The front tire sagged instantly, air hissing out like a dying whistle. She threw the car into park and jumped out, her sunglasses sliding down her nose as she stared in disbelief at the shredded rubber. Marcus stood at the edge of his driveway, arms crossed, fighting to keep a straight face. Karen shrieked, "What the hell? What's wrong with this street?" She crouched down, glaring at the destroyed tire, then noticed the subtle glint of metal just beneath the grass. She gasped, then straightened, spinning toward Marcus with fury blazing in her eyes. "You," she yelled, pointing a manicured finger at him. "You did this." Marcus shrugged, keeping his tone even. "You drove across my lawn. Again. I told you not to. That's private property, Karen. Maybe if you stuck to the road like everyone else, this wouldn't have happened." Her face flushed crimson, her voice rising in pitch. "You sabotaged me. You put nails or spikes or whatever this is in your yard to attack me. That's illegal. That's assault." Marcus let out a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. "It's not assault when someone trespasses. I never invited you onto my lawn. I don't know what you expected would happen if you kept disrespecting my property." Karen stomped a foot like a child. I'm on the HOA board, Marcus. You think you can get away with this? I'll have you fined, I'll have you cited, I'll have you kicked out of this neighborhood. Her voice carried down the street, and soon enough, a few neighbors began to emerge from their houses, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Patterson from across the street peered over her hedge, whispering to her husband. The Harris kids stopped their basketball game, the ball bouncing lazily away as they watched the drama unfold. Karen, ever conscious of her audience, shifted into full performance mode. She placed a hand dramatically on her chest and turned toward the growing crowd. He put spikes in his yard. Can you believe that? Spikes. What if my car had flipped? What if children were running across his lawn and got hurt? He's dangerous. He's a menace to this community. Murmurs spread through the small audience. A few looked uneasy, but most seemed skeptical. Everyone knew Karen's reputation. She had spent years policing their garbage cans and measuring their hedges. Now, watching her red-faced tantrum, some neighbors struggled to hide their smirks. Marcus took a slow step forward, his voice steady and loud enough for everyone to hear. Let's set the record straight. For weeks, Karen has been trespassing on my property. I've asked her politely to stop. She ignored me. She destroyed my lights, smashed my plants, and laughed about it. I worked hard on this lawn, and I'm not going to let anyone treat it like a shortcut. The spikes aren't dangerous to kids, they're under the grass. They're only a problem if you decide to drive where you're not supposed to. Like Karen did. The crowd shifted again. A few nodded. Someone muttered, "Makes sense to me." Karen's face twisted in outrage. "You're lying. You're all just letting him get away with this because..." She stopped herself abruptly, her eyes narrowing. Marcus knew what she was about to say, the venom behind the words she almost let slip. She caught herself just in time, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Because what, Karen? Her lips pressed into a thin line. She turned back to her SUV, muttering curses under her breath as she pulled out her phone. Within minutes, a tow truck was on its way, and Karen sat fuming in her driver's seat while the neighbors slowly dispersed, shaking their heads. But Marcus knew it wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to lick her wounds quietly. She was going to make this a war. Sure enough, the next morning, a bright yellow HOA violation notice appeared taped to Marcus's front door. It accused him of creating unsafe conditions on his property, and threatened fines if he didn't remove hazardous materials immediately. Marcus felt his stomach knot. He had expected this, but it still stung to see how quickly Karen had leveraged her position. Instead of panicking, Marcus decided to fight fire with fire. He gathered evidence. Photos of the tire tracks crisscrossing his lawn, the broken solar lights, the smashed pots, the ruts left behind by Karen's SUV. He even installed a security camera pointing at his yard, capturing clear footage of Karen cutting across multiple times before her blowout. When the HOA meeting rolled around that week, Marcus showed up with his binder of evidence. The room was tense, Karen sitting at the head of the table with her arms folded, glaring daggers at him. She launched into her accusations immediately, painting Marcus as reckless, dangerous, a threat to children and pets alike. But when Marcus calmly laid out his photos, videos, and dates of every incident, the room shifted again. Board members exchanged glances, whispers spread, and Karen's voice grew shrill as she realized she was losing control of the narrative. One board member finally cleared his throat. "Karen, it looks like Marcus warned you multiple times. This doesn't reflect well on you." Another added, "If anything, Marcus has been remarkably patient. I think the real issue here is someone repeatedly trespassing, not someone protecting their yard." Karen sputtered, slamming her hand on the table. "You're all blind. He set a trap. He's dangerous." But no one came to her defense. For once, her power over the HOA seemed to falter. Marcus left the meeting that night with no fines, no penalties, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing Karen had finally been exposed. The spikes stayed where they were, invisible guardians beneath the grass. And though Karen continued to scowl at him whenever their paths crossed, she never again dared drive across his lawn.